In the last part we saw, Eleanor and Marcus activated a portal using the map and artifacts, leading to a celestial library containing infinite knowledge. Eleanor obtained a powerful tome but was forced to flee alone when masked pursuers attacked. Returning home, she grappled with her newfound responsibility while cryptic warnings hinted at looming danger. Trusting no one, she resolved to assemble allies to safeguard the tome's secrets. With enemies watching and worlds at stake, Eleanor vowed to protect humanity from the truths she now carried. Now let's continue part 3 of this story. The first rays of dawn filtered through the kitchen window as Eleanor sat at the table, staring at the tome resting in front of her. Its crystalline surface shimmered faintly, almost imperceptibly, as though it were alive and aware of her presence. She had spent hours poring over its pages, deciphering fragments that hinted at technologies capable of rewriting reality, and weapons potent enough to unravel it. Each revelation filled her with awe and dread in equal measure. Her burner phone buzzed again, snapping her out of her thoughts. This time, the message was from Marcus, or so she hoped. It read simply, "Safe. Meet me tonight. Same place." Relief washed over her, followed quickly by suspicion. Was this truly him, or another trap? The masked figure's leader had proven cunning, and Eleanor couldn't afford to let her guard down, not even for someone she trusted like Marcus. Still, she knew she couldn't face what lay ahead alone. Gathering her courage, she replied, "I'll be there." That evening, after ensuring Mark and Alex were settled in for the night, Eleanor slipped out of the house under the guise of running errands. Her pulse quickened as she drove to the abandoned warehouse where she'd last met Marcus. The streets were eerily quiet, the kind of silence that felt heavy with anticipation. Every shadow seemed to move just beyond her line of sight, every sound exaggerated by paranoia. When she arrived, Marcus was already waiting inside, his silhouette illuminated by the dim glow of a single bulb. He looked haggard, his usual composure replaced by tension etched into his features. "You made it," he said, his voice low but tinged with relief. "For now," Eleanor replied cautiously, closing the distance between them. "What happened back there? Who were those people?" Marcus hesitated before answering. "They're part of a larger network, call them custodians of forbidden knowledge. They've been hunting relics like the tome for centuries, making sure they don't fall into the wrong hands." "And you?" she pressed, narrowing her eyes. "Are you one of them?" "No," he said firmly. "But I know enough to understand why they're afraid. That book, it's more than just knowledge. It's a key to everything." His words sent a chill down her spine. Before she could respond, a sharp noise echoed from outside, a metallic clang, like someone kicking an empty can. Both of them froze, exchanging wary glances. "They found us," Marcus muttered, reaching for his weapon. Eleanor tightened her grip on the tome, her mind racing. If their enemies had tracked them here, then nowhere was safe. Not the warehouse, not her home, not even the celestial library itself. But as fear clawed at her chest, something else emerged alongside it, resolve. "Then we fight," she said, her voice steady despite the storm raging within her. "Because if we don't stop them, no one will." And with that, the battle for the fate of worlds began anew. The sound of footsteps echoed outside the warehouse, deliberate and measured. Eleanor's breath hitched as she moved instinctively toward the center of the room, clutching the tome tightly against her chest. Marcus positioned himself near the entrance, his weapon drawn but his stance cautious. Shadows danced along the walls, cast by the flickering bulb overhead, creating an eerie tableau that made it impossible to tell friend from foe. "They're not here for a chat," Marcus whispered, his eyes scanning the darkness beyond the door. "Whatever you're planning, do it fast." Eleanor nodded, her mind racing. She couldn't risk letting the tome fall into enemy hands, not after everything she'd sacrificed to protect it. But escaping wouldn't be enough. They needed leverage, something to turn the tide in their favor. Her gaze fell on the artifacts scattered across the table, the obsidian mirror, golden compass, and crystal shard. Though their energy had dimmed since activating the portal, they still held residual power. Perhaps they could serve one final purpose. "Cover me," she said softly, stepping toward the table. With trembling hands, she began arranging the artifacts in a triangular formation, mimicking the pattern she'd used to open the celestial portal. The air around her seemed to hum faintly, responding to her movements. "What are you doing?" Marcus hissed, glancing over his shoulder. "Buying us time," she replied without looking up. And maybe finding a way out. Before he could press further, the door burst open with a deafening crash. Masked figures poured into the room, their weapons raised and aimed directly at Eleanor and Marcus. Their leader stepped forward, his presence commanding even beneath the anonymity of his mask. "Hand over the tome," he demanded, his voice cold and unyielding. "Or we'll take it from your corpse." Eleanor straightened, meeting his gaze with steely determination. "You'll have to kill me first," she shot back, echoing her earlier defiance. But this time, there was no bluff in her tone, only resolve. The leader smirked, raising his weapon. "So be it." In that split second, Eleanor activated the artifacts. A surge of energy erupted from the triangle, sending out a shockwave that knocked the intruders off their feet. The room filled with blinding light, forcing everyone, including Marcus, to shield their eyes. When the glow subsided, a shimmering rift had opened in the center of the warehouse, its edges rippling like liquid starlight. "Go!" Eleanor shouted, grabbing Marcus's arm and pulling him toward the portal. Without hesitation, they dove through the threshold, leaving the masked figures scrambling in their wake. On the other side, chaos reigned. They emerged into a realm unlike anything either of them had ever seen, a sprawling expanse of floating islands suspended in a vast glittering void. Bridges of translucent crystal connected the landmasses, while rivers of luminous liquid flowed upward, defying gravity. Above them, constellations shifted and rearranged themselves, forming patterns that pulsed with ancient meaning. "This isn't possible," Marcus stammered, staring wide-eyed at the surreal landscape. "Neither is half the stuff we've seen so far," Eleanor replied, her voice tinged with awe despite the urgency of their situation. "But here we are." As they took in their surroundings, a low rumble reverberated through the air, growing louder with each passing moment. Turning sharply, Eleanor spotted movement in the distance. Massive creatures resembling winged serpents soared gracefully between the islands, their scales reflecting the kaleidoscopic hues of the sky. For now, they seemed indifferent to the newcomers, but how long would that last? "We need shelter," Marcus said, snapping her attention back to the immediate danger. "Somewhere to regroup and figure out our next move." Eleanor nodded, scanning the nearest island. At its peak stood a structure carved into the rock face, its entrance flanked by towering statues of humanoid figures holding orbs of light. Something about the design felt familiar, as though it belonged to the same architects who had created the Celestial Library. "There," she said, pointing toward the structure. "Let's hope whatever's inside is friendly, or at least empty." They moved quickly, navigating narrow paths and precarious ledges until they reached the entrance. The doors slid open silently, revealing an interior bathed in soft, golden light. Intricate murals adorned the walls, depicting scenes of creation and destruction intertwined. In the center of the chamber stood another pedestal, similar to the one in the library, but instead of a book, it held a single glowing orb. Eleanor approached cautiously, her instincts screaming caution. As she reached out to touch the orb, a voice resonated throughout the chamber, deep and melodic yet devoid of gender or origin. "You seek refuge," it intoned. "Yet your arrival brings both salvation and peril." She froze, her hand hovering inches above the orb. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice steady despite the knot tightening in her stomach. "I am the Echo," the voice replied. "A fragment of the Keeper, bound to this place. You carry knowledge that spans realities, a burden few can bear. Speak your intent, and I will judge whether aid is warranted." Exchanging a glance with Marcus, Eleanor stepped forward, gripping the tome tightly. "I came here seeking answers," she began, choosing her words carefully. "Answers that could protect humanity, or destroy it. I don't know what lies ahead, but I won't let fear dictate my choices. If you can help me understand this power, I'll use it wisely." The orb pulsed brightly, its glow intensifying until it filled the entire chamber. When the light faded, the Echo spoke again, its tone softer but tinged with warning. "Your sincerity is commendable, but sincerity alone cannot shield you from the storm gathering on the horizon. Allies will rise, enemies will emerge, and sacrifices will demand payment. Will you endure?" Eleanor hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Yes. Whatever it takes." The orb dimmed, and the murals on the walls began to shift, revealing hidden compartments containing tools and relics unlike anything she'd ever seen. Among them was a map etched onto a crystalline tablet, showing pathways connecting not just worlds, but timelines. To navigate the tempest, you must trust those who share your cause, the echo advised. But beware, betrayal wears many faces. With that, the chamber fell silent, leaving Eleanor and Marcus alone amidst the treasures. As they examined the artifacts, Eleanor felt a renewed sense of purpose, and a gnawing awareness that the hardest battles were yet to come. Eleanor traced her fingers over the crystalline tablet, its surface cool and smooth beneath her touch. The map etched onto it glowed faintly, revealing routes that seemed to shift and rearrange themselves as she watched. Each pathway pulsed with a different hue, some bright and inviting, others dark and foreboding. It was as though the tablet itself were alive, responding to her thoughts and emotions. "What does it mean?" Marcus asked, peering over her shoulder. His voice betrayed a mix of fascination and unease. "It's not just a map," Eleanor murmured, her eyes narrowing in concentration. "It's possibilities, choices." She pointed to one of the brighter paths, which branched off into several smaller veins. "These must represent potential outcomes based on decisions we make, or don't make." Marcus frowned. "So this thing predicts the future?" "Not exactly," Eleanor replied. "More like it shows probabilities. But if we can read it right," her voice trailed off as realization dawned. "If we can navigate these timelines, maybe we can change what's coming." Before Marcus could respond, the ground beneath them trembled slightly, accompanied by a distant rumble that echoed through the chamber. Outside, the winged serpents had begun circling closer, their movements no longer languid but purposeful. One of them let out a piercing cry, and Eleanor instinctively stepped back from the entrance. "They found us," Marcus said grimly, raising his weapon. "How long until they break through?" Eleanor glanced around the chamber, her mind racing. The relics scattered throughout the room, tools, weapons, and objects whose functions were unclear, might offer some defense, but against creatures of this scale, brute force wouldn't be enough. They needed something smarter, something unexpected. Her gaze landed on the glowing orb still resting on the pedestal. If the echo had deemed them worthy of aid, perhaps the orb itself held power beyond mere guidance. "We fight smarter," she said decisively, striding back toward the pedestal. "Help me figure out how to use these tools." Together, they began examining the artifacts. Some were immediately recognizable, blades forged from materials that shimmered like liquid metal, gauntlets etched with runes that pulsed with energy. Others defied explanation entirely, a sphere that emitted low-frequency vibrations when touched, a staff capped with a crystal that refracted light into dazzling patterns. As they worked, Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that each item was designed for a specific purpose, one tied to the challenges ahead. "This might work," Marcus said suddenly, holding up a small device resembling a compass but with multiple dials instead of a single needle. When activated, it projected a holographic grid into the air, mapping out the surrounding area in real time. "It looks like a scanner. Could help us spot weak points or ambushes." Eleanor nodded approvingly before turning her attention back to the orb. Tentatively, she placed her hand on its surface, bracing herself for another surge of energy. Instead, warmth spread through her palm, and the murals on the walls lit up once more, displaying new images. This time they depicted battles, not between armies, but between individuals wielding the very tools now scattered around the chamber. "The echo is showing us how to use them," Eleanor realized aloud. She grabbed a blade adorned with intricate carvings and handed it to Marcus. "Here, try this." He hesitated, then nodded, gripping the hilt cautiously. The moment he did, the blade hummed softly, its edge glowing faintly blue. "What the hell?" he muttered, staring at it in disbelief. "You'll need it," Eleanor said firmly, grabbing a pair of gauntlets for herself. She slipped them on, feeling an immediate surge of strength course through her arms. Whatever technology, or magic, powered these relics, it responded directly to intent. The rumbling outside grew louder, punctuated by the sound of stone cracking under immense pressure. The winged serpents were testing the structure's integrity, and it wouldn't hold much longer. "We're running out of time," Marcus warned, moving toward the entrance. He positioned himself strategically, scanning the horizon for signs of movement. "Any ideas?" Eleanor's eyes darted between the map on the tablet and the array of relics. An idea began to form, risky but potentially effective. "We'll use the terrain to our advantage. Those bridges connecting the islands, they look fragile. If we can lure the creatures onto them." "And collapse them," Marcus finished, catching her drift. But how do we get them to follow us without getting ourselves killed first? For a brief moment, silence reigned. Eleanor and Marcus stood panting, their bodies trembling with adrenaline as they took stock of their surroundings. The immediate threat had been neutralized, but the cost of their victory became clear when Eleanor noticed a crack forming in the tablet surface. "The map," she whispered, horror creeping into her voice. "It's breaking." Sure enough, fissures spread rapidly across the crystalline surface, disrupting the glowing pathways. Within seconds, the tablet shattered completely, leaving only fragments that faded into nothingness. "What does that mean?" Marcus asked, his tone urgent. "It means we're on our own," Eleanor replied grimly. "No backup plans. No second chances." As if to emphasize her words, the chamber rumbled again, this time violently. Above them, the constellations shifted erratically, casting chaotic shadows across the landscape. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. "We need to move," Eleanor said, grabbing the remaining relics and stuffing them into a satchel. "This place isn't stable anymore." They exited the structure just in time to witness the skies above splitting open, revealing a swirling vortex reminiscent of the portal they'd used to arrive here. But unlike the controlled energy of the Celestial Library's gateway, this rift radiated raw, untamed power. From the vortex emerged figures clad in silver armor, their faces obscured by helmets etched with glowing sigils. They descended onto the floating islands with precision, their weapons humming with latent energy. At their head stood a woman whose presence commanded authority, her cloak billowing dramatically despite the lack of wind. "You've meddled with forces beyond your comprehension," she declared, her voice resonating like thunder. "Surrender the tome, or face annihilation." Eleanor tightened her grip on the satchel, her resolve hardening. "Who are you?" she demanded, stepping forward despite the overwhelming odds. "I am Commander Silra of the Temporal Wardens," the woman replied. "Guardians of the timeline. And you, Eleanor Grayson, have disrupted the balance of existence." Eleanor exchanged a glance with Marcus, who looked equally bewildered. "Balance? We didn't ask for any of this." "Intent matters little when consequences ripple across realities," Silra countered coldly. "Your actions have unleashed chaos upon the multiverse. Now, you will answer for it." Before either of them could react, the wardens advanced, their weapons charging with blinding energy. Eleanor knew they couldn't win a direct confrontation, not against such overwhelming numbers. But surrender wasn't an option either. "Follow my lead," she whispered to Marcus, clutching the tome tightly. Then with a sudden burst of speed, she darted toward the nearest bridge shouting, "Run!" Eleanor's feet pounded against the crystalline bridge as she sprinted toward the next floating island, Marcus close behind. The wardens gave chase, their silver armor gleaming ominously under the shifting constellations. Energy bolts zipped past them, shattering chunks of the fragile pathway and sending shards spiraling into the void below. "This isn't going to work," Marcus shouted, glancing over his shoulder at the rapidly closing distance between them and their pursuers. "We're outmatched." Eleanor didn't respond immediately, her mind racing for a solution. She clutched the tome tightly in one hand and the satchel of relics in the other, unwilling to let either fall into enemy hands. Ahead, the bridge narrowed precariously, its edges crumbling from the strain of the warden's pursuit. "Trust me," she called back, spotting a jagged outcropping on the adjacent island. Without slowing down, she hurled the vibrating sphere, a relic they'd used earlier, onto the bridge behind them. As expected, the device emitted another deafening screech, destabilizing the already fragile structure. With an ear-splitting crack, the bridge collapsed entirely, sending several wardens plummeting into the abyss. But Commander Silra wasn't deterred. She raised her hand, and the remaining wardens leaped across the gap using some form of anti-gravity technology embedded in their boots. They landed effortlessly on the far side, continuing their relentless advance. "We need another plan," Marcus yelled, skidding to a halt beside Eleanor as they reached the edge of the island. Below them stretched an endless expanse of glittering nothingness, offering no clear escape route. Eleanor scanned the horizon frantically, her eyes landing on a distant spire rising from one of the larger islands. At its peak, faint blue light pulsed rhythmically, almost like a beacon. Something about it resonated with the energy emanating from the tome in her arms. "There," she said, pointing toward the spire. "That's our only shot." Marcus followed her gaze, skepticism etched across his face. "You think that thing can get us out of here?" "It has to," Eleanor replied grimly. "Otherwise, we're dead anyway." With renewed determination, they bolted toward the spire, dodging energy blasts and navigating treacherous terrain. The wardens were relentless, their movements precise and calculated. Every leap, every strike felt like a step closer to capture, or worse. As they neared the base of the spire, Eleanor noticed intricate carvings spiraling up its surface, similar to those in the celestial library. Symbols glowed faintly beneath her touch, responding to the tome's presence. She hesitated only briefly before beginning her ascent, climbing the smooth stone with surprising agility. Marcus followed closely, keeping watch for any sign of their pursuers. Reaching the summit, they found themselves standing before a circular platform etched with runes that matched those on the map's fragments. At the center stood a pedestal identical to the one holding the orb back in the chamber. Instinctively, Eleanor placed the tome onto it, triggering an immediate reaction. The air around them shimmered, and the platform began to hum with escalating intensity. Commander Silra appeared moments later, stepping onto the summit with an expression of cold fury. "You cannot escape destiny," she declared, raising her weapon. "The timeline demands order." Eleanor turned to face her, defiance blazing in her eyes. "Order at what cost? Sacrificing free will? Destroying entire worlds just to preserve your version of balance?" Silra's gaze hardened. "You speak of concepts you cannot comprehend. The multiverse is delicate, a single misstep could unravel everything." "And yet," Eleanor countered, clutching the tome protectively, "you claim authority over life and death, creation and destruction. Who decides what's right or wrong? You." Before Silra could respond, the platform surged with blinding light, enveloping the entire spire. Eleanor felt herself being pulled upward, her body weightless as the world around her dissolved into streaks of color and sound. Marcus grabbed her arm, anchoring them together as they ascended into the unknown. When the light faded, they found themselves in a vast ethereal plane unlike anything they'd encountered before. Stars floated freely, untethered by gravity, while rivers of liquid light flowed in impossible patterns. In the distance, massive gates loomed, each inscribed with symbols representing different timelines and realities. "What is this place?" Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible over the gentle hum of the surroundings. "The nexus," Eleanor murmured, recognizing the term from the visions she'd seen in the celestial library. "A convergence point for all possible outcomes." Behind them, the temporal wardens materialized, led by Silra, who looked both enraged and awestruck. "You've brought us to the heart of existence itself," she spat. "Do you realize the chaos you've unleashed?" Eleanor ignored her, focusing instead on the gates. One in particular caught her attention, a towering archway radiating warm, golden light. Unlike the others, which flickered erratically, this gate seemed stable, inviting even. She didn't know why, but something deep within her, the same instinct that had guided her through every trial thus far, told her it was the key to everything. "We have to go through there," she said firmly, turning to Marcus. "It's our only chance." He nodded, trusting her judgment despite the uncertainty swirling around them. Together, they approached the gate, ignoring the shouts and warnings from the wardens. Just as they stepped through, Silra lunged forward, attempting to grab hold of Eleanor's satchel. Her fingers brushed the fabric, but it was too late, they were already through. On the other side, they emerged into a serene landscape bathed in soft sunlight. Rolling hills stretched endlessly, dotted with trees whose leaves shimmered like emeralds. In the distance, a city rose majestically, its architecture blending seamlessly with nature. People moved about peacefully, their expressions calm and content. For the first time in what felt like ages, Eleanor allowed herself to breathe deeply, taking in the tranquility of their surroundings. But the respite was short-lived. A figure approached them, a woman cloaked in flowing white robes, her presence radiating wisdom and authority. "You've come far, Eleanor Grayson," the woman said, her voice melodic yet commanding. "But the trials ahead will test not only your strength but your soul." Eleanor met her gaze, unflinching. "Who are you?" "I am the Weaver," the woman replied, "guardian of potential futures. And you, child, stand at the precipice of destiny. Choose wisely, for the threads of fate are yours to weave." As the Weaver's words hung in the air, "The threads of fate are yours to weave," Eleanor felt the weight of her newfound role settle heavily on her shoulders. The serene landscape surrounding her offered a fleeting moment of peace, but she knew it wouldn't last. Somewhere beyond the horizon, forces aligned against her were gathering strength, determined to reclaim the tome and restore their fragile version of order. Beside her, Marcus stood silent, his expression a mix of awe and unease as he took in the otherworldly city and its enigmatic inhabitants. The weaver watched them both with an unreadable gaze, her presence both comforting and foreboding. Whatever trials lay ahead, Eleanor realized, they would test not just her resolve but her very soul. For now though, she allowed herself a single steadying breath. She had come too far to turn back, and too much was at stake to falter. With the tome clutched tightly in her arms and Marcus by her side, she stepped forward into the unknown, ready to face whatever challenges awaited. In the next chapter, Eleanor delves deeper into the mysteries of the nexus, unraveling truths that could alter the course of existence itself. As alliances shift and enemies close in, she must decide whom to trust, and what kind of future she wants to create. With time running out and the temporal wardens hot on her trail, the battle for the multiverse reaches its crescendo. The threads of fate await.